I recently faced something no father should ever have to say out loud. The HOA president called the police on me while I was unpacking my deployed son's belongings in our family cabin. Her excuse? She claimed I was a criminal trespasser breaking into her community's property. Funny thing is, the only thing stolen was her illusion of control. Let me start from the beginning. The flashing lights painted the pine trees red and blue, turning our peaceful corner of the lake into a crime scene from some television show. One minute, I was placing my son's favorite guitar on its stand, the smell of old wood and lake water filling my nose. The next, I was squinting into the glare of two police cruisers that had crunched to a stop on the gravel path I called a driveway. And there she was, standing beside the lead car like she was directing traffic at the scene of a disaster.
Karen.
Her arms were crossed tight against her chest, her face a perfect mask of sour victory. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger right at me, then at the cabin. Her mouth moved, and even from 50 yards away, I could feel the poison in her words. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew she was the cause. I stepped out onto the porch, my hands raised just a little, a gesture I hoped showed I wasn't a threat. My heart thumped a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. A younger officer got out of the passenger side, his hand resting on his service weapon. The other, an older man with a tired face and a thick mustache, walked toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. He wasn't running, but he wasn't relaxing either. This was serious. "Sir," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm Officer Miller. We received a call about a break-in and theft in progress." He gestured vaguely toward the cabin behind me. I just stared at him. A break-in? Here? The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. It was more my home than the house I actually lived in. A break-in? I managed to say, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "Officer, there must be a mistake. This is my family's cabin." I pointed back toward my truck, where boxes of my son's belongings were still sitting in the bed. "My son, Leo, he's Army. He just deployed overseas. I'm just moving some of his things into storage here while he's gone to keep them safe." I looked over at Karen, who was now talking to the younger officer, her head shaking with what I'm sure was supposed to look like deep concern. She was a master of fake emotions. I'd seen it before, but never aimed so directly at me. It was like watching a snake coil. You don't know why it's doing it, but you know it's not good. Officer Miller's eyes didn't soften. He was a professional, and he had a job to do. "The complainant," he said, nodding toward Karen, "states this property is vacant and under the management of the Cypress Creek Estates Homeowners Association. She's the president. She says you have no right to be here." I could feel a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. "The HOA? Officer, my family built this cabin 60 years ago. We've never been part of any HOA." I reached for my back pocket, then stopped myself. My wallet's inside. My driver's license has my name, Tom Coleman. The property records at the county courthouse will show this cabin belongs to the Coleman family. It has for decades. Karen must have overheard me because she marched over, clipboard in hand. She never went anywhere without that clipboard. It was like her scepter of power. "Officer," she said, cutting in, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "this man is a known troublemaker. He has several outstanding violations at his primary residence." That was a lie. I had one notice about my grass being half an inch too high, which I'd already fixed. "This cabin falls within our association's designated territory," she continued. "It has been empty for years, a blight on the community. We have bylaws against this sort of thing. Vagrancy, unauthorized storage." She was throwing words around like stones. I was speechless. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. This woman, who I barely knew, was standing on my land, telling a police officer I was a criminal. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. My son was serving his country, and I was trying to do something small for him, something to give me peace of mind. And this woman had turned it into a spectacle. The younger officer was looking at me with suspicion. Karen's performance was convincing if you didn't know her. She sounded so sure of herself, so official. Officer Miller, however, just looked tired. He seemed to have seen this kind of neighborhood drama before. "Ma'am, let me handle this," he told Karen, holding up a hand to stop her. He turned back to me. "Do you have any proof of ownership on you, Mr. Coleman?" I explained again that my wallet was inside on the kitchen table. He nodded. "Okay, stay right here. My partner will accompany you to retrieve it." The younger officer walked with me onto the porch and into the cabin. The smell of lemon polish and old memories hung in the air. I felt like a stranger in my own home, being watched as I picked up my wallet. I walked back out and handed my license to Officer Miller. He looked at it, then back at me. He keyed my name into the computer in his car. A few moments later, he came back. "I recently faced something no father should ever have to say out loud." He then turned to Karen. "The HOA president called the police on me while I was in your HOA's deployed son's belongings. Do you have a map of the association's boundaries?" Her excuse? Karen's smile was triumphant. Was a criminal trespasser breaking into her community's property. "Of course I do. Funny thing I'm always prepared. The only thing stolen she handed him a laminated sheet of paper. Let me start from the beginning. It was a map of the neighborhood with a thick red line drawn around pine trees, red and blue. Our little cabin was clearly in the lake into a crime scene. Officer Miller studied it for a long moment. 1 minute. He then walked back to his car, son's favorite pulled out a tablet and started tapping on the screen. The smell of old wood and zoomed in on a digital map. My nose. His brow furrowed in concentration. I was squinting into the glare of stretched police cruisers broken only by the chirping of crickets and the low hum of the police car's engine. Standing beside the lead car like smug, she was directing traffic at the scene. She was waiting for the moment they would put me in handcuffs. Her arms were crossed. She was probably already composing the triumphant email she would send to all the other homeowners about how she had single-handedly stopped a perfectly manicured finger right at me. I just stood then at the cabin, my hands in my pockets, her mouth moved, trying to keep my anger even from 50 yards away. This was beyond a simple misunderstanding. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew she was the cause. I didn't know why she was doing it. I stepped out onto the porch. I knew I couldn't let it stand. My hands raised just a little. Not when it was tied to my son. A gesture I hoped showed I wasn't his things, his memory of home. My heart thumped a slow, felt like defending him against my ribs. Finally, Officer Miller looked up got out of the passenger side. He looked at Karen's map, hand resting on his service weapon. He did it again. The other, an older man with a tired face almost and a thick expression settled on his face. Walked toward me with a slow, he walked back deliberate pace, holding the tablet. He wasn't running, but ma'am, he wasn't relaxing either. His voice suddenly very serious. "I think we have a problem," he said. His voice calm but firm, and the air got very still. "Officer Miller, can you show me on this official county map where your jurisdiction ends?" He gestured vaguely toward the cabin behind me. I just stared at him. A break-in? Here? The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. It was more my home than the house I actually lived in. A break-in? I managed to say, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "Officer, there must be a mistake. This is my family's cabin." I pointed back toward my truck. My life up until that point had been intentionally still sitting in the bed. My wife, Sarah, and I had raised our son Leo. He just deployed overseas in a decent neighborhood. I'm just moving some of his things into storage here while he's gone to planning shipping routes and managing inventory. I looked over at Karen. It was now talking to the younger officer. Her head shaking with what I'm sure was allowed us to build a good life. Concern. My guiding principle was master of fake emotions. Mind my own business. I'd seen it before. Treat people with respect, but never aimed so directly at me. I figured if I followed those rules, trouble. You don't know why it's doing it, but you know it turns out I was wrong. Officer Miller's eyes of my new trouble was Cypress He was a professional, and the HOA that bordered our older, the complainant, he said, neighborhood. Nodding toward Karen. And I was this property is vacant. Every time I saw one of their ridiculous newsletters, it reinforced my decision. The HOA was run by Karen. She says you have no right to be here. Even before she aimed her full attention at me, I could feel a hot flush of anger creep up my neck. You couldn't live within a mile of her. And officer, my family built this legend in her own mind. We've never been pristine white SUV. Always I reached for my back pocket, the speed limit, then stopped her eyes scanning left, my wallet's right for violations. My driver's license has my name, too long. Tom Coleman. A holiday decoration the property records left at the county courthouse will show this cabin belongs to the Coleman family. These were high crimes in Karen's world. Karen must have overheard direct run-in with her before the cabin incident had been minor. She never went anywhere without written in aggressive writing. It was like her scepter informing me that my mailbox officer, which had been there for 20 years, cutting in, was her voice not in harmony with the aesthetic of the adjacent community. This man is a known troublemaker. My community wasn't adjacent. He has several outstanding violations, and my mailbox was on my property. I threw the note away. I had one notice about my deployment was one of the hardest of my life, which I'd already fixed. Sarah and I drove him to the base within our association's designated territory. The whole ride was filled with a thick silence. The kind that's empty for full of things you want to say. A blight on the community. When he hugged us goodbye, we have bylaws against this sort of thing. Strong and confident in his uniform. I had to fight to keep my composure. She was throwing words around like stones. Quiet, but with a deep well of strength. The sheer audacity of take care of your mom, Dad. This woman, said, who I barely knew, rough with emotion, was standing on my land. Don't worry about telling a police officer I was a criminal. But it wasn't just stuff to me. It was a physical thing. It was his life packed into boxes. It felt like a heavy coat. His collection of old vinyl records. My son was serving his country, yearbooks, and I was trying to do something small for him. I bought him something to give me peace of mind. Ended up loving. And this woman had turned it into a spectacle to protect the younger officer was looking at me with suspicion. That's where the cabin performance was convincing. My grandfather built it with his own two hands on a piece of land his father had bought. So official. It was rustic. Officer Miller, smelled of cedar and wood tired, and sat on a small bluff this kind of neighborhood drama before. It was outside the city limits, handle this. And he told most Karen, importantly, holding up a hand to stop eyes of any HOA. He turned back to me. It was our family's proof of ownership on you, Mr. When Leo was little, I explained again that my wallet was inside on the kitchen table. It was the perfect place to keep his things safe. Stay right here. So the weekend after he left, my partner will accompany you to retrieve it. I rented a small moving truck. The younger officer walked with me onto the porch. It was emotional work. The smell of lemon polish and old memories hung in the air. A box of sci-fi paperbacks. I felt like a stranger in my own home. He spent hours as I picked up my wallet he could find. I walked back out. His beat-up baseball handed my license still smelled of leather. He looked at it, then back. As I was loading the last box, he keyed my name into the computer in his car. Wandered over a few moments later, he came back. Was a character. He was a retired mailman who had seen it all and had an opinion on everything. His yard was a chaotic masterpiece of garden gnomes, pink flamingos, and bizarre sculptures he welded himself out of scrap metal. He lived just inside the Cypress Creek Estate's border, which meant he was a constant source of irritation for Karen and a constant source of amusement for me. "Moving day, Tom?" he asked, leaning on my fence. He was holding a gnome that looked suspiciously like a fisherman. Just taking some of Leo's things no father should ever have to say out loud. He then turned them out of the way until he gets back. President called the police on me while I was in your HOA my deployed son's belongings. Do you have a map family association's boundaries? Karen smiled triumph. The queen bee has been on the tap breaking into her community. Of course I do. Funny thing, I'm buzzing around looking for new infractions. The only thing stolen she handed wrote up laminated sheets for having a standard neighborhood with a flashing line drawn around the shook his head in disbelief. Our little cabin was clearly everyone to a especially Officer Miller studied it for a long moment. She's got binoculars. He then walked back to my son's favorite guitar and started tapping on the smell of power. He zoomed in on a digital map. It's not in her little nose. In concentration. I was squinting into the glare of stretched on. Her kingdom has a way of expanding the gravel path. And the low hum just watching your back's engine. He patted his hair in the car like salty here. Will keep an eye on things. She was waiting for the moment they would give me a warning. Though I didn't take it too seriously. She was probably already composing the triumphant email. She would cabin was miles away from her direct line of sight. She pointed and perfectly manicured finger right at me. I just stood then at my hands loading the mouth moved, trying to keep my anger from boiling yards away. This was beyond a simple. I felt a sense of purpose. I had no idea what my dad did, but I knew she was. I didn't know why she was doing it. I stepped out onto the porch. I could hands raised, just not when it was tied to gesture. I hoped showed I was starting to set. His memory of long shadow felt like defending him. I turned finally long gravel. A younger officer got out of the passenger side. He looked at Karen's hand resting on his service weapon. Everything felt right. He did it again. I was a world away from HOAs and their confused expressions settled. I was in my family's safe. He walked back deliberate. What I didn't know, holding the tablet, he wasn't running, but man, he wasn't relaxed slowly. His voice suddenly very serious. Karen had been watching. I think from the window of her immaculate calm, and the air got very still. Powerful binoculars me on this official county map and their jurisdiction ends. And as my gesture veered down the road, the cabin I just stared at him. Her mind breaking, scary of the cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. It was more my home than the house I actually lived in. A break I managed to say the words feeling clumsy officer, there must be a mistake. This is my family's cabin. I pointed back toward my truck. My life up until that my son's belongings were still sitting in the bed. My wife Sarah and Leo had raised our son Leo. He just deployed overseas. The confrontation. I'm just moving some steady house storage here while he's gone. planning shipping routes,
and
I looked over at Karen
and killed
it
the
was now
engine,
exciting to the younger
silence
of the woods
her head
settle
shaking
around
with
me.
what I'm sure
And
was a
allowed us
I
to
just
sat there
good-like
soaking it
concern.
in. My guiding
This place
principle
was
was the
the
polar
fake
opposite
emotion.
of
Mind my
Karen's
own
world.
business.
I'd seen it before
Treat people with
here,
respect.
but
Never
rules
end
were made
so
by
cause
directly
trouble.
at me. Trees
it was
figured
like
if I
watching
followed
a
those
snake
rules,
coil.
the shoreline
You don't know
why
why
it's
it's
doing
water
it,
level.
but
You know
it
it's
turns
not
out I was
only
wrong.
aesthetic, it had
Officer
deep
Miller's
form.
center
I
of my
was
new
in
trouble
with
was
beauty.
he was a
With freakish
professional.
shades.
I felt the tension
And
in
each
my
way
job
that
to
bordered our
ease.
older,
The complainant
more
was the right
established
decision.
neighborhood.
Nodding
We
to
weren't
the
part of it,
truck was a
and
state
I was
grateful
property
for
is
careful
vacant.
process.
Every
And
time I
under the
saw
management
one of
of
their
each
ridiculous
cypress
like
creek was made of
it
glass.
reinforced my
I set up Leo's
The
small HOA
HOA
was
was
run
run
by
by
She
Karen.
says you have no
Even
right to
before
be
she
aimed her
arranging
full
his
attention
I
at
could
me.
feel, I could almost hear him
telling
creep
me
up my neck.
you couldn't live within a mile of her. I plugged in a circuit
my
player.
family
She was a
built
legend
put
in
on
her
an
old
old
album.
We've
She
never
drove
been
a
part
pristine
of
white
any
needle
HOA.
filled the rustic
Always
space. I reached for my back
miles
pocket
under the
familiar
then
music.
stopped
Her eyes
I
scanning
carefully
my wallet
unwrapped
rights
my
for violation.
My
And
driver's
placed a blade of
license
grass
has
corn
my
long,
name.
where
Tom
the evening
Coleman.
holiday
Coming
decoration
property
left
record
up at the
made
county
it to our
courthouse will show
Each
this item
item
was
invisible
piece of
from
puzzle that
family.
made up my
These
son.
were
Housework
high-crime
arranging them
games
felt
Karen's
like an
world.
act of
Karen
love.
must
My
have
only
overheard
direct
way of
run-in
keeping
with her
marks
was
over
over
the
live
live
clipboard
incident
in hand.
minor.
So
She
far. She
never
left a
went
note on my
anywhere
door
so
without
lost
written
in my
before.
task
It was
that
I didn't hear the door
informing
towers.
me that my mailbox.
It was the music from the
had been there
record
for
player
20
that
years.
cutting in
was
was
tires
not
on
in
ground.
harmony with the
It was
aesthetics
only when the
of
music
this
was drowned
man
out
is
by
a
a
known
rival
my community
siren that I
wasn't
looked up.
adjacent.
Several
Hers
outstanding
was
violations
and
of
my
the
mailbox
primary
was on my
residence.
property. I
I
walked through the
door
doorway and
I
peered
had
out.
one
Leo
notice
and
about
there
my
they were.
grasping
Was one of
two
the
police
hardest
cars,
my
lights
flashing,
which I'd
Sarah
already
right up
and
to my
I
porch.
drove
Cabin
into the
falls
base
within our association.
the
The
whole
whole ride
ride
filled with
underscore
underscore
the kind that's
underscore
empty for you
underscore
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 community.
when he hugged us
we have
goodbye
bylaws against wrong and confident in his
underscore underscore
I had to fight to keep my
underscore
underscore
she was a
throwing
good man
words around like
underscore
stones. Quiet, but
I
with
was
a deep well of strength, sheer audacity. Take care of your mom, dad. This woman said, who I barely knew, standing on my land.
Don't worry about
telling
my
a
stuff.
police officer.
Here's the next
criminal.
section of your
But
story.
it wasn't
Humiliation
just
was a
punctuation.
physical
It was
thing.
his glamour. It felt like a heavy code.
His collection of old
vinyl
vinyl
records.
My son was served
later
after everything.
I was trying to
I
do
got
something
lava
small
lamp
by
by him,
911
something to give me peace of mind. Reading it made my stomach
like a
turn.
sacred duty.
The operator's
To
voice
protect
was
the
calm.
younger
Pieces of
officer was looking at me with
Karen's was a
That's where the
frantic
cabin
performance
was
convincing.
My
If you didn't
grandfather
know about it,
911.
with his own
She sound
hands
hands
on
on
a
a
piece of
piece of
land.
land.
Yes, hello. So official.
This is Karen
Officer
Peters,
Miller,
smelled of
president
cedar
of the
and
Cypress
tired.
Creek Estates,
And
seemed
seemed
to
to
have
have
seen this kind of
overlooking
neighborhood
the
drama
road.
before.
It was
started with
outside
man
city
city
limits.
limits. There's a
And
break-in
he told
happening
me
right now at
holding
the
up
old
hand
Vegas
signs
cabin on the
of
lake.
any
He turned
HOA.
back to me.
It's
It
part
was
of
our
our
family
family's
ownership
sanctuary.
on you, Mr.
When
Every
Leo
word
was
was a
little,
calculated
I explained
lie.
again that
my
my
suspicious
wallet
man
was
skipping
inside
on
on
the
I've
kitchen
seen him
table.
lurking
It was the
before.
perfect
He nodded
place
to
to
keep
keep
his
his
things
safe.
stay right here.
He's breaking
So the
in
weekend
and
partner will
will
accompany you to
I
retrieve
rented
it.
a
You have
small
to younger
truck
officer
and
walked
started
with
me
me
onto
onto
the
my
porch.
license plate
It was
and into the
emotional
cabin.
work.
She
The
must have
smell
every
of
item
brown
I
polish
picked up
brought back
old
memories.
memories. She painted a
Hung
picture
in
of
the
a
air.
dangerous
I felt like a
criminal.
stranger in my
Reminded
own
me of
summer.
perfect
He spent
being
hours
watched
I
as I
picked
picked
up my
my
wallet. He could
She
find.
was
I
the
walked
hero
back out,
beat up
and
face
handed my
glove,
license
still
plate and
smelled
Miller.
of leather,
Standing on my porch,
as I was
facing
loading
two
the
police
last key,
officers
my
who
name into my
believed
computer
Peter
grant
Grant's car
wandered
was one of the
over.
few
Few
moments
of
he
my
Grant
life.
was a character.
My mind
He was a
raced.
retired mailman.
Had someone
who had
actually
seen
broken
it all
in before I
and
got
had
there?
an opinion on
Did they
everything.
think I was the burglar?
His yard was a chaotic masterpiece of garden gnomes, pink flamingos, and bizarre sculptures he welded himself out of scrap metal. He lived just inside the Cypress Creek Estate's border, which meant he was a constant source of irritation for Karen and a constant source of amusement for me. "Moving day, Tom?" he asked, leaning on my fence. He was holding a gnome that looked suspiciously like a fisherman. I recently faced something sounding weak ever have to my own. He then kicked him out of the way and my HOA president called me moving my while I was expressing my the words felt thin against the reality of flashing lights and Karen's smile was triumph. The younger officer looked happily into her cabin. Of course I do. Funny thing, buzzing around looking for it probably did stolen. She handed wrote up laminated sheets for having a careful arrangement just looked like thick red lines drawn around the humiliation red and sharply. Our little cabin was watching a middle-aged man, especially Officer Miller studied it for a long time. I was treated like passing my favorite tablet. The entire company got now late hour. He zoomed in on a digital map. My attempts to reason with her little ears. I was squinting into the glare that stretched on her kingdom was a way of expanding. I could see the doubt in the officers just watching And there she was siding with Karen, standing beside my car, like salty, sounded to keep an eye on things. Had docked waiting for the moment. They thanked herself, warning. Though I didn't think she was tight against her. I was just some guy I sent an email. She was cabin was miles away from her
homeowners
direct line
to
of sight.
She pointed
Looked
and
perfectly manicured
all my
finger
life.
right at me.
I just stood then
with my hands floating the top.
If you told the
Wanted
truth,
to keep my anger
even
from
from
boiling
50 yards
over.
away,
But in
I
that
could
moment,
beyond a simple
I felt a sense of purpose.
I had
This
no
was
idea what
deliberate
dad
activity.
meant. I knew she
And
was.
I didn't know why she was doing it.
I stepped out onto
It was
the porch.
then
Came
my
my
hands
hands
raised,
just
not when it was
drive
a
the
gesture
older
I
I
hoped
showed.
showed.
Defending
I was
started
set.
He set me to
My
get my
thumb
thumb
shadow.
Felt
Ran
like
my
heavy
name
beat.
and
I turned
finally
finally
long
a
gravel
younger
Miller
but that wasn't enough
to
passenger.
dispel
He looked at
Karen's
Karen, his
man.
hand
Ran
resting
back
on
to
his
serve
everything
was the
felt.
map.
He did it
The
again.
other,
He
I
stood
was
there
older
staring
man
away
with
from
a
tired
HOA
face
emanated
and a
fantasy
heavy
mask
mustache.
to the
So I was
assistant
my family
slow.
slow. He walked back deliberately.
What I didn't know,
holding the tablet.
he wasn't
down.
couldn't have
But
possibly
man,
known.
he wasn't
He said,
relying on
"Line
his
on his
voice.
voice."
Suddenly,
This was
very
Karen
had
had
been
been
watching
watching.
him.
Sir,
From the
I
window
said,
of her
confident
immaculate
smile,
and
and
the
the
air got
through a very
she
chill,
thought it was a
powerful
formality.
formality.
She received a call about
She thought
her
her authority
and
and
through
through
the
the
sheer
progress.
force of
And
will.
as my
He
trust
understood
underscore
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 she thought
underscore
I just stared at him.
but reality
underscore
radiant
underscore
scary.
underscore
Mr. Miller
Kevin
looked
had
up
been
to
in
my
my
family
family
for
for
3
three
generations.
generations.
It was more my clear underscore
underscore
a sound that
underscore
underscore a break
underscore
I managed to say, now looking directly at healing and this serious problem and nothing to do. I pointed back toward my truck. My life air went still. My son's Karen's smile flickered like my wife Sarah and Leo had raised our son Leo. He just deployed overseeing the confrontation. I'm there on the steady job. Officer Miller's planning shipping routes back to the truck. I looked over at Karen and killed the now exciting to the younger officers of the woods settled around. What I'm legally registered as soaking in. My guiding place was one that polar opposite. Mind my own business. I'd seen it before. Here, but the ruins were made so directly at me. The cypress trees were like watching snake oils right there. Shoreline, you don't know why it's doing it to a spot on the ground. It was only aesthetic. Officer Miller center of my neutral line. He was a professional. I felt the tension in my way that gesturing to my family like the right decision. Is not your parent never been part of our property. Careful process. Every time I saw treated I set up Leo's HOA was run. She says you have no right to aim for bullets. I could feel, I could almost hear anger creep. You couldn't live within a mile away. I plugged her. My family built a legend put on an old album. We've never been pristine white and HOA. Filled the rest. I reached for my back pocket. Stopped her eyes. I scanned for my wallet right for the aftermath. My driver's license was in Karen's face. The evening holiday decoration wrapped up at the county courthouse will show the items visible from the puzzle that made our documents arranging them felt like that digital map. My only way of running with the younger officer supported mine comfortably. She left a note anywhere so lost in my tab. Miller informing me that my mailbox. It was the music from the record player. Cutting in. It is the legal boundary with the. It was only when the music was drowned out by a rap. My community, you filed a 911 reporting violation. My mailbox was my property. Zero legal hours the note away. You've reported one notice where they were. Sir, asked two police cars. Lights flashing. Sarah right up to my drove to the base of the association. The whole ride underscore a blight. She looked from the tablet to my face. Bylaws against she was a good man. Quiet, but I was deep well sheer audacity. Take care of your mom, Dad. Officer Miller, who I barely knew, understanding on my hand. Don't worry about calling a police officer. Here's the next section of your story. The humiliation was physical. It was his grammar. It felt like he gave heavy pensions collection of old vinyl records. My son was later. I was trying to do some bobble and something to keep me silent. Reading it made my stomach frozen for the operator's voice. The younger officer was looking at me. Karen's was a friend. Shot me a little breathless. Was convinced my grandfather felt like with his physical hands unsure of herself. Without a word. So official. Officer Miller, President and Cypress Creek Estate, and Senator had seen this kicking neighborhood drama before. She always started on my porch. Handle this. Heartbreaking. Most important now, holding up a hand. I won the battle, and he turned back. But the war had our family's ownership on you, Mr. Every word was a calculated. I explained again that my suspicious man. I've seen him lurking before. It was the perfect place to keep big things safe. Stay right here. He's breaking in. My partner will accompany you to retrieve it. I rented a small younger officer walked with me onto the porch. License plate. It was emotional work. She must have every item I picked up brought back old memories. She painted a picture of a dangerous criminal. Stranger in my own summer. Perfect. He spent hours. I picked up my wallet. He could find. I walked back out. His beat up face handed my license still smelled of leather. Standing on my porch, as I was loading the last key, my name into my computer. Grant wandered was one of the most few moments later. Grant was a character. My mind raced. He was a retired mailman. Had someone actually broken in before I got there? And had an opinion on everything. Did they think I was the burglar? His yard was a chaotic masterpiece of garden gnomes, pink flamingos, and bizarre sculptures he welded himself out of scrap metal.
He lived just inside the Cypress Creek Estate's border, which meant he was a constant source of irritation for Karen and a constant source of amusement for me. "Moving day, Tom?" he asked, leaning on my fence. He was holding a gnome that looked suspiciously like a fisherman.